Hello, hello, welcome back. Or if you're new here, hi, my name is Kennedy. I share this YouTube channel with my two best friends, Michaela and Reggie, where we talk all things books. We have a book podcast and we like to do weekly individual videos. So here I am. And for my video this week, I'm going to be giving you guys a March reading recap. I read 12 books, so buckle up. This might be kind of a long video. And when I went back to look at how many books I had read this month, I couldn't believe that I read 12. Last month, I think I read 4. So this was quite the jump for me. And honestly, it was a very diverse reading month. I read some really, really good books. I also should mention that I do count audiobooks towards books that I have read. Or I guess a better word for it would be consumed, because I technically didn't read them. But I do count them towards my reading goal because I survive on audiobooks during the summer. I do a lot of driving and I have to listen. The first book that I consumed in March is actually an audiobook, and that book is Scythe and Sparrow by Bryn Weaver. This is the third book in the Ruinous Love trilogy. If you aren't familiar with it, it is a dark romance. However, it's not as scary as it sounds. I don't know if this is an actual genre, but the way I categorize the Ruinous Love trilogy is dark rom-com. There are dark romance aspects to these books, but there is a lot of comedy and lightheartedness, which sounds weird. In this particular book, we're following our two main characters, Fionn and Rose. Fionn is a doctor. He was kind of giving McDreamy a little bit to me. And then Rose is involved in a carnival, and she kind of has a little bit of a murderous streak to her. And basically it just kind of follows their story. I rated this book 3 stars. Honestly, in my opinion, Butcher and Blackbird, which is the first book in this trilogy, is the best book. I don't laugh in a lot of books, but Butcher and Blackbird made me laugh consistently. I would say that this book, Scythe and Sparrow, is probably number 2, and then I would put Leather and Lark at number 3. If you haven't read this series, I would recommend listening to it. The audiobooks are very well done. Both of the voice actors did such a great job, and if I'm remembering correctly, I could be wrong, so before you use an Audible credit or use a hold on Libby, maybe listen to a sample, but I'm pretty sure that the male narrator narrates his dialogue even in a female narrator's chapters. So it feels a little bit more like a dramatized audio without all of the noise and the stuff that's going on in the background. If you're looking for something a little bit different with some dark elements, I would recommend these books. I'm not a dark romance girly, but these were still such a fun listen. I next read The Prison Healer by Lynette Noni, and this is a YA fantasy book. I have had this on my shelf for over a year, so it was about time that I read this series. In this series, we're following our main character, Kiva. She is a prisoner in the Zalandov prison. Essentially, that is the prison that the kingdom sends their worst criminals to. And she is our lovely prison healer. So basically, we are just following her story to try to escape the prison. I rated this book 3 stars, mostly because it felt really predictable to me. Weirdly enough, it was unique and unlike some other YA fantasy books that I have read, but it kind of just felt like I knew what was coming. The first, I don't even know, 150 pages were really slow and hard to get through, but the ending is a banger. I will say it had me wanting to continue on and read the next book ASAP, which leads me to the next book that I read in March, The Gilded Cage by Lynette Noni, which is the second book in the Prison Healer trilogy. I'm not going to say too much about this book because I don't want to spoil the first book for you, but the second book was better than the first. It's a continuation of Kiva's story, and there are certain elements that are in the second book that were just a lot more intriguing to me. Once again, the ending of this book had me shaking. It was a wild ride. I rated this 4 stars, once again just because it is YA, it feels a little bit more simple and things do feel, again, a little bit predictable, but this series is so much fun. I know that it used to be talked about a lot on Book Talk. I don't see it talked about as much anymore, but if you love YA, I think you'll really, really, really love this series. I then listened to Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. I had heard Michaela talk about this series on a few different occasions, and I had it available instantly to me on the Libby app, so I thought, why not? Let's try it. In this book, we are following Audrey, who studies forensic science, and essentially the story of this book is they are trying to find and capture Jack the Ripper. This book is YA, but it does tend to get maybe a tiny bit gory because you are dealing with forensic science and Jack the Ripper. I rated this book 2.5 stars. And I honestly wish I wouldn't have listened to it. There wasn't really ever a point where I was really invested in the story, partly because I listened to it and partly because I just don't love mysteries or whodunits, I've come to find. Most mysteries that I read, I'm just not really invested. And I don't want to say that the ending is obvious because it wasn't, but at the same time, in hindsight, it was really obvious. I don't know if I will continue on in this series. I don't feel super invested in the characters. I may continue on if I have nothing to listen to and it's available instantly on the Libby app for me, but I do think that this would be a fun October read. Next up is our March book club book for the month, which was The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, and I am so glad that we picked this as our book club book because I don't know when I would have gone to it if we wouldn't have picked it, because it's intimidated me for so long. I don't want to give too much detail of my thoughts because we do have a full podcast episode that went live on Wednesday about it. I'll link it in the description if you want to watch it. But this is an Asian-inspired fantasy that follows our main character, Rin, who goes to a college to train to be a warrior. And that's about all I can say for the plot. I rated this book 4 stars. While reading this book, I was convinced it was going to be a 5-star read for me until about the middle portion. The middle portion was a little slow and a little bit confusing for me. And honestly, I just think I'm really stingy with 5-star reads. They have to be perfect, you know? I don't feel like you should have a ton of 5-star reads, and if you do, I'm so jealous and I wish I had more 5-star reads, but this was so good nonetheless. I am obsessed with Rin. I have never read a book like this, and I cannot wait to continue on in this series. Also, you can see that I do have the collector's edition of this book, which made reading that much more fun. I mean, it has, let me find a non-spoiler picture. It has illustrations, so it really just kind of set the scene for me with this book. This isn't really that much of a spoiler. The illustrations are beautiful. R.F. Kuang's writing is insanely good. I've read this book and Yellowface by her, and the books are polar opposites, which just tells you how amazing of a writer she is. I can't wait to start the next book. This series is good. It's brutal, be fair warned, but it's good. The next book is a book that I've been putting off for a really long time, probably because this author's writing, I wouldn't say it's intimidating, it's just really science heavy and I kind of feel stupid reading his books, but the book is The Martian by Andy Weir. I was obsessed with Project Hail Mary by this author. I honestly thinking now I should really go back and rate that book higher because I think about it a lot. But this one wasn't as good to me as Project Hail Mary. I haven't watched the movie adaptation for this book, but I want to. This actually inspired me to watch Interstellar. I don't know why. I went on this weird space kick this month after I read this book. This book follows our main character, Mark, and he, with his team, is sent to a planet, and his team thinks he died on that planet and they leave. But little do they know, he's actually alive. And so this is the story of him living on that planet alone. My main issue, as I kind of stated earlier, is that Andy Weir's writing is so technical and science heavy that sometimes it overshadows the plot and the character development a little bit. I can appreciate the research that goes into his books. Project Hail Mary was the same way. They're really technical and sometimes it feels like you're reading a textbook, but this one just didn't have the same emotional depth that Project Hail Mary had. And so since that was my first Andy Weir book that I read, I kind of had that expectation. And this was a tiny bit of a letdown. Still cried at the ending though, which isn't a surprise. If you're wanting just a strictly sci-fi, a little bit science heavy book that has a little bit of emotional depth to it, I would really recommend this. Like I said, I haven't seen the movie, so I can't do a direct comparison, but I do know that a lot of people really love the movie. And as a side tangent, if you haven't seen Interstellar, I know I'm really late to the game, but wow, was it good. And I'm forever thankful for this book for inspiring me to embark on a space-themed content binge this month. Did I say what I rated this? I rated this 3 stars. I don't remember if I did. Following The Martian, I listened to This Summer Will Be Different by Carly Fortune. If you guys listened to our recommending books for our listeners episode, you'll know that that is the book Reggie picked for me to read. Honestly, the vibes were immaculate. It would be the perfect summertime read. Obviously, I read it in March. It's not quite spring where I live, but it put me in the mood for warmer weather. In this book, we're following Lucy and Felix, and I don't want to tell you too much about the plot because I don't want to spoil the tropes, and I don't want to spoil the surprise that happens in like the first chapter. While I was listening to this certain thing happens and I squealed like a little girl just because I thought it was such a fun element to this book. But what I will tell you about this book is that it is a dual timeline book, which honestly is kind of fun. I kind of like dual timeline. This book wasn't super memorable to me, but I do remember just having a really good time with it and really loving the male main character. He carries a book in his back pocket 24/7. I mean, that should say enough about him, right? I did rate this book 3.5 stars, and I think that if I would have read it instead of listened to it, I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more. This next book, honestly, I shouldn't count it towards my reading goal, but it's on Goodreads. And because it was on Goodreads and because I'm behind on my reading goal, it motivated me to read this book, and that is The Lexington Letter, which is a Severance book. You can get it on Apple Books if you just if you Google The Lexington Letter, you'll find access to it. If you love Severance and you haven't read this book, highly recommend. It gives you an insight into MDR that the show doesn't give you. Basically what this book is, and honestly, I don't even know if you can really count it as a book because 20 of the pages are basically a handbook for MDR, but the other remaining part of this book is letters written from someone who is severed to a news agency, and also you get some letters from the innie to the outie and vice versa. We watched the 2nd season of Severance this month, and when I found out that this book existed, I was like, all right, I gotta read it because it's not very long and I'm obsessed with it. I'll consume any Severance content that I can get, and honestly, I do feel like it fuels some of the theories that I have going on in my brain. So once again, if you've watched Severance, you're a big fan, go read The Lexington Letter. I feel like it will just be a fun little 20-minute read for you. Next up, I finished the Prison Healer trilogy by reading The Blood Trader, and I rated this 4 stars. Overall, this series I would give 3.75. This isn't necessarily a series I would want to go back and reread. That's why I didn't rate it higher. And also, once again, I've said this 500 times, it just is a little bit predictable, but I love the characters. I love the magic system. I love the world. It was so much fun. If you want something that's not light and fluffy, because it's not light and fluffy like a rom-com, but you don't want something that's going to hurt your brain, but you're in the mood for fantasy, pick this one up. The romance is great. The conflict is great. There's some plot twists that you may or may not guess. But nonetheless, very fun, and I would recommend this to any fantasy reader, honestly. For this next book, I have a little bit of bone to pick with you guys because I asked on our Instagram story for your opinion on what the book I should read on vacation should be. And I gave you guys 3 options. I gave you Summer in the City by Alex Astor, Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong, and The Last Letter by Rebecca Yarros. And you guys chose The Last Letter by Rebecca Yarros, and that book is not a vacation read. I cannot emphasize that enough. It is a sit in a corner in your home by yourself with a box of tissues at the ready because you will cry. This book is so sad. It's so sad. And I almost did not rate this book 5 stars because I almost did not finish it at about 90%. If you've read this book, you know why. But a book that makes me feel that viscerally deserves 5 stars. If you haven't read any of Rebecca Yarros' romance books, she writes military romance. In this book, we're following Beckett and Ella. Ella is a mom of 2 twins, and her brother Ryan is in a special military unit, and he convinces his best friend Beckett to write letters to his sister Ella because Beckett doesn't really have a support system. He doesn't have a family. He doesn't have a lot of friends, and so he wants them to write each other because he thinks that Ella will be good for him. And then the story goes on. Make sure you have tissues for this one. That's all I'm gonna say. The next book I listened to, and I'm very proud of myself for continuing on in this series. I made it a goal this year to finish the series, and I didn't honestly think I was gonna do it, but I'm doing it. I listened to Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. These books are just so much fun. They're really nostalgic. Even though I didn't read them when I was younger, they still feel that way to me. We're entering in to the portion of the story that I don't remember from watching the movies from so long ago. For example, spoiler warning, if you haven't read or watched The Prisoner of Azkaban, I forgot that Peter Pettigrew was Scabbers. So that whole thing went down and I was so surprised. We actually watched the movie yesterday, and it was surprising to me just how much they cut out from the book. First of all, Cedric is in this book. He is the Seeker on the Hufflepuff team when they play Hufflepuff in a Quidditch match. So I don't really know why they didn't have him in this movie. I mean, it's such a small portion of the book. They also cut out an entire Quidditch match with Slytherin that was in this book. Basically, I feel like the majority of the stuff they cut out is very Quidditch based in the movies. Nonetheless, the movie was really fun to watch, especially right after listening to this book. I'm having so much fun, and I can't wait to read Goblet of Fire. I rated this 4 stars. I also feel like it's hard to objectively rate these books because I have such nostalgia towards them. And the last book that I read in March was Beartown by Frederick Bachman. I already know that this is going to be one of my favorite series of all time. I don't read a lot of fiction books, but Frederick Bachman just does them so different. Reggie read this before me, and she had kind of explained to me that the first 100 pages were really boring. And I do think that going into this book, knowing that helped my experience be better. So if you're interested in reading these books, just know that the beginning of the book feels really mundane. It's following, honestly, like 12 different characters who live in a small town that is obsessed with hockey. And you just kind of follow their day-to-day lives. And it feels so unimportant until you get to the end. I'm a firm believer that those first 100 pages, watching those characters and just kind of getting to know them and seeing them be just normal human beings makes you connect with them, so the ending is that much more rich. You come to know and love these characters, and by the end, you can't fathom there not being another book because you need to know what's happening in their lives. And lucky for me, there is another book. This is a book about the human experience. It's a book about what it's like to truly live in a small town From someone who lives in a really small town, I dare say that this is honestly pretty accurate, especially when it comes to sports and putting certain people in the community on a pedestal. It's also a book about the butterfly effect almost, and kind of how one certain person's decisions can affect multiple lives and honestly an entire town. I cried multiple times during this book because there were so many small acts of kindness that honestly feel like aren't a big deal. But reading this book, it just goes to show how the small things really matter. I am obsessed with this book. I cannot believe it took me this long to read it. I actually only rated it 4.5 stars, and I'm not really sure why I didn't give it 5 stars. I can't give you an exact reasoning why, so maybe I should go and rate it 5 stars. I love this book. I feel like this is the closest thing to make me feel the way that the Magnolia Park series has made me feel. So hats off to Frederick Bachman. I cannot wait to read the next book. I do know that there is a TV show based on the book. I don't know if I'll watch it just because I have this book in my head. I think of this book so highly. I just don't know if the TV show will live up to the book. You guys could sway my opinion if you've seen the TV show and you think it's good. And that is everything that I read in the month of March. Once again, I do feel like this was such a good reading month for me. I'm really excited for April because there are so many good releases coming out. We have The Conditions of Will by Jessa Hastings. We have The Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry. We have Say You'll Remember Me by Abby Jimenez. We have Fearless by Lauren Roberts. And so many more that I think April might be my best reading month yet. But if you guys have any recommendations that you think I would love to read, please drop them in the comments. I love when you guys give me recommendations. I feel like they're always top tier. If you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our podcast. It's called I'll Read What She's Reading, and you can find it anywhere that you listen to podcasts, or you can just watch the podcast right here on our YouTube channel. You can also shop our merch at illreadwhatshesreading.com. We have some really fun pieces. I will also link my Goodreads in the description if you want to stay up to date with what I'm currently reading in real time. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much. I hope you have a great reading month for the month of April, and I will see you next time. Bye!